Welcome to Global Forum, a platform of discussion of global issues from global perspectives. Today we have a very distinguished guest, Congressman Keith Ellison, the first elected Muslim congressperson, member of Judiciary Committee, but I think most importantly in our context, he has become one of the principal organizers of community energies and forces towards not a politics of despair, but politics of hope, politics of possibilities, and creating this kind of vision of self-empowerment. Welcome, Congressman.
Pleased to be here, Doctor. Honored to meet you and to be here today.
Thank you, sir. The first question I want to ask you is, we have a sense of despair in the community which was expressed this afternoon also. How do you understand that despair, and what is your judgment for those people who are not here today, how to deal with that despair?
Well, it's no secret that in post 9/11 America, and even somewhat before that, Muslims have had a number of events that have made them feel not necessarily a part of American society, living somewhat on the margins of society. I can't tell you how many sisters have had their hijabs pulled off or have been discriminated in some way because of that. Many people in post 9/11 were interviewed by the FBI who did absolutely nothing wrong, and some people were taken into custody, deported for having nothing to do with terrorism, just technical violations, and so there is a certain amount of despair. But what I say is that, after the hardship, comes the ease, and that, God won't intervene on behalf of a people until they do something on their own behalf. But I believe that when you work in a righteous way and in good faith, there's something about the makeup of the universe, God, that conspires in your favor. Breaks start coming your way when you don't allow yourself to get embittered, but you allow yourself to get better. And we'll remember, as Muslims, we have an excellent example in the person of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, who encountered extreme hardship, even from his family, loss of status within his very prestigious family, all kinds of challenges that came his way, and yet always moved forward with a full heart, with a full spirit, faith in God, turning to prayer when he felt he needed it, and even when he didn't need it. So the thing is that my message is things are going to get better, God willing, if we continue to press forward, organize, get our message out as you have done so excellently, and continue to be involved and be part of the solution.
Excellent. Now, this despair that we see partly is rooted in the government actions, both at the level of law enforcement agencies like FBI and Homeland Security and other entities and customs, also in terms of legislation. Why is it that the pendulum is still swinging in the direction? We have now pending legislation, I think HR 1955, radicalization of thought, which is nothing short of thought policing. Why is that moving in that direction, and what can be done by civil rights coalitions all over America to change that?
Well, what needs to be done is we need to be part of the conversation. In America, as you know, there are conversations that go on all the time. What are we going to do about immigration? What are we going to do about the housing crisis? Well, what are we going to do about what is the national debate going to look like when Muslims put their voices in the debate on the issue of national security? As you know, Muslims died in the Twin Towers. There's no question about it. And to kill people who are innocent is antithetical to what we believe in. But we've got to find a way through elections, through offering legislation, through participating, through voting, to become the kind of bloc that must be recognized and respected. As I said earlier, sometimes it's not that you're doing the wrong thing, it's that you haven't been doing the right thing long enough or enough. I say stay involved, get involved, don't back down, continue to participate. So I think that, for example, on HR 1955, this bill calls for a national panel that would be charged with investigating what causes people to turn toward radicalism, things like that. Why don't we jump in front of this thing and say we want to insist that there would be Muslims on this panel, that we want to make sure that that the real story gets told, that it doesn't simply be a vehicle for somebody to attack the mosque, attack the Muslim community. This is engagement, and that is what I think is the best solution. Because certainly if we don't engage in the conversation, it will still go on, but it will go on without our voice. So let's get involved.
Congressman, isn't there a risk when we put Muslims on that, and there are all kinds of Muslims, there are all kinds of Christians, all kinds of Jews,
Absolutely.
that we actually might be promoting a mindset which actually is aimed at thought control and silencing public discussion. And we know already the discussion in this country is within a very small framework, very narrow framework. So the very fact that state deals with thought control and thought manipulation, shouldn't we challenge the root cause instead of trying to remedy only its manifestations?
I think we should challenge it on all fronts. Challenge the root cause, absolutely. But let me just tell you what big companies do when they're engaged in certain practices that are not good for consumers. First of all, they try to stop any kind of reform. Then once there's momentum behind the reform, they start trying to alter it to a direction that they want. We have to at least do as much. So the fact is that, yeah, deal with it at its root. If you can't stop it at the root, then try to shift it so that it actually achieves your goals and not others. This is what I mean by engagement on various fronts. The fact is that America does not know what engenders violent radicalism within its population. Because if it knew, it could have done something about Timothy McVeigh. It could have done something about so many other non-Muslims who have done so much damage to our country, but we don't know anything about it. What do we know about what were the root causes of Columbine or Virginia Tech or the shooting at Red Lake? These are serious social problems, and we don't know anything about them. What if we could say, look, we want to know what makes a Timothy McVeigh tick. We're not trying to stop people from expressing themselves, but we want to know. One thing we do know, if I may add this, brother, please. One thing we do know, that somebody who's getting on an airplane to go to a business meeting is not the root cause of radicalism, right? Some businessman minding his own business or seeing his family is not the root. So we are bothering all these folks on the airplanes when they're just 6 imams in Minnesota got on the plane to pray. They passed through all security. They still were thrown off the plane. We know that this activity, praying, is not what engenders radicalism. Maybe if we understood it better, we could deal with it better, but we don't know anything. So let's attack it at the root, attack it at the branch, deal with it all along.
But isn't there some certain assumptions that go very much into understanding the word radical? For instance, when a state has a policy that kills 500,000 kids because of hunger and poverty, isn't that radicalism also?
I certainly believe that it is. I believe that it's unjust, it's wrong. We must challenge it. We must raise our voices. We must confront it at every turn. We must not only march in the streets, we got to enter legislation, we got to use the courts, we got to sue. We have to go outside of government and build understanding. Let me just tell you this. What if, let me just use our imaginations for a moment. What if between 1991 and 2003, Americans of all faiths, all colors, all cultures got together with Food and Medicine and sent it to the people of Iraq? We may have been able to prevent 500,000 Iraqi children from dying. Not everything has to be a government solution, but we've got to engage on multiple levels. Some people say, if you were to do a humanitarian effort like that, some people might say, well, aren't you accepting the assumption of the sanctions and the war if you try to relieve that human suffering? Aren't you sort of accepting the basic assumption? No, we're not accepting the basic assumption, but we are using this in humanitarian effort to show that the war was wrong from the beginning. So interim measures have value.
Absolutely, absolutely. But let me ask you another question then. As we are looking at different possibilities of action, including interim actions, will it be appropriate on part or justified on part of not only Muslims but many, many fellow Americans that since the last election, since Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi became the Speaker, Democrats have failed to do what they were expected to do to rectify the situation? And why should then people invest so much confidence in the Democratic Party?
You know, you're right about that. I'll tell you that the American people gave the Democrats a mandate in 2006 to get out of Iraq, and we're still there. And that is something serious to consider. One of the differences between being an activist and being a politician is that if you're an activist, you can continue to make a morally based urging that we must get out of Iraq, we must support only candidates who will get us out. But as a politician, you have to do the best you can with what you got within the framework that it is there. So I would say that American voters should ask themselves, what gives American people the best opportunity to get ourselves out of Iraq in an expeditious way? John McCain or Barack Obama? The Democrats or Republicans? It's not a great solution. It's not a panacea, but we've got to do the most we can with what we have within the framework we're in. And so that's what my answer is. I think Nancy Pelosi is a better choice than John Boehner is. And so I'd say support Democrats, but hold them to the fire. Don't let them off the hook.
Okay, let's talk about holding them to fire. We had recently a very clear example of prejudice and discrimination by way of guilt by association in case of Mazen Asbahi.
Yes, good friend of mine, yeah.
Good friend of yours, and he is a man who's very sort of an upstanding American citizen.
Yep.
And he was accused of having worked with an unindicted co-conspirator.
Unindicted.
All right? Which is another way of maligning people in public square without proving anything.
You're right.
And then he had to sort of resign his position.
Yep.
And I did not see any great Democratic leader standing up and saying this is wrong. Why is that?
Well, let me just tell you this. I worked closely with Mazen throughout this process. And here's what Mazen said. Mazen said this: if I remain on the campaign, I will give the right wing 2 or 3 weeks of baseless media mess, and they will, whether I'm fair or not. Mazen's position was that Michelle Malkin, O'Reilly, Hannity, all of them would just be banging on this issue 2-3 weeks. By resigning, he essentially deprived them of a stick to beat the Obama campaign with. I'm going to tell you that I have personally addressed members of the Obama campaign about Mazen and the way he was treated. I have personally gotten engaged in that process and said, you know what? What happened to Mazen wasn't right. Mazen's a good man. Mazen's reputation needs to be upheld and protected. But the fact is that, again, doing the best you can with what you have. Is it all that we want? No. Was Mazen treated unfairly? Yes. But the fact is, Mazen made a strategic decision, and I think I respect his decision, and I think his analysis was right.
I appreciate it. We are running out of time. And I also want to acknowledge what you said in your speech by summarizing. You told us that 3 things must happen. One is that there has to be political reform. Second is personal growth and commitment.
Yep.
And third is social change, interaction, relationship change. So I would like to ask you a 2-point question. One, to what extent do you think Muslim community is able to work on that 3-dimensional change within itself? And secondly, how can we work as Muslims in this country, uphold American ideals, and yet get our government not to support dictators?
Well, you know what? It's fundamentally a question of organizing and engagement. The Muslim community, no, let me put it like this. Countries where Muslims predominate are in a situation where the United States supports dictators that oppress the people. But we did it in Haiti. We did it in the Philippines. Can we, as a Muslim community, be a force for just proper international relationships? I think if we argue that peace and diplomacy should be the guiding principle of our foreign policy, mutually beneficial trade relationships and economic relationships, not why is our oil under your sand, but how can we all create a renewable society? This is what Americans, Muslims and non-Muslims must work on. And what that means is that I'm supporting ideas in Congress like the Global Marshall Plan. Take 1% of American gross domestic product and send it into developing roads, bridges, and water and women's rights around the world, strengthen societies, including Muslim societies, so that people can have a better way forward. Stop this madness of 1 billion people in this world living on less than $1 a day. Do you know that last night, 30,000 children died from starvation. You know, but let me tell you, 20 years ago, it's 45,000 children. Things can get better if we try. This the Muslim community has to be leading the charge on better relations. You know, we've had, take Pakistan for example, we've had a Musharraf policy, not a Pakistani policy. We have not tried to strengthen the institutions in that country. We've tried to pick out people who like us, and that's who we support, and not the American people, but elites within America. So it's been an elite to elite policy, not a people to people policy.
Let me ask you one question. I had already asked you last question, but I'm going to ask you one more,
yes,
supplementary.
Sir?
Is it possible for House Judiciary Committee to promote or to present a bill or a sense of the House resolution supporting the existence and reinstatement of independent judiciary in Pakistan, not in supporting an individual, but the concept?
I'm all in favor of it. And let me tell you, I promise to work on it. As a matter of fact, I've already started. My office, we've been in dialogue and discussion about this issue, and I think that it'll pick up steam based on Musharraf's recent decision to not continue on as president. But we have a strong Pakistani community, Egyptian community, Moroccan community, Indian community, and we need these American voices to help inform our foreign policy. And we're not doing it. We're not unwrapping all of the gifts at our disposal here in America on how to go forward in the world in a better, more just, more humane way. And we've got to be active and engaged to insist upon it. So thank you for all the work you do. I'm a tremendous fan of yours, and I want to let you know that I pray that God will continue to bless you so you can keep on doing what you do.
Thank you, Congressman, and I thank also our colleagues, particularly Nativo Lopez and Dr. Anayat Lalani and other Dr. Farooq Ansari and other members who are here. Thank everybody of them. Let me conclude by saying I lived in this country for roughly 36 years. The longer I have lived in this country, the more I fall in love with American ideals and principles. And the more I fall in love with American ideals and principles, the greater need I feel to stand up and fight for them. There are two Americas today, one that wants to go the neocon route and degrade everything, and one that wants to restore America to its original dignity and its own original purity. And that's what we want to do. Thank you very much.
And I can tell you that in our party, in this Democratic Party of ours, we don't accept the scapegoating of Muslims, discrimination against Muslims, because we think what makes America different is that this is a place where the freedom of religion and worship are essential to who we are.